Welcome everybody to this online event entitled the Sahel Security Conundrum Towards a New Equilibrium, organized by the POE, the Program on Extremism here at George Washington University. This is senior researcher Sergio Altuna-Galan, and I'm honored to serve as his moderator for today's discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. This event is indeed the second of a two-part series we've dedicated to examining the complex security landscape in the Sahel region. Several weeks ago, we tried to establish the state of the art to define some way among jihadist organizations operating in the Sahel, exploring reasons behind their notable expansion and size and scope of operations, capabilities, etc. The recording of these events has been uploaded to the program's YouTube channel, and if you didn't have the chance to attend, I highly encourage you to check it out, since it really provides some of the keys that are complementary to the topics that will be discussed here and now. Today, we've placed the focus on reconfiguration of security landscape in the region, and with the help of the experts who have so generously agreed to share their knowledge with us today, we'll try to better understand all the ongoing changes. But before delving into the subject, let me briefly explain the structure of the event itself. It will run for approximately 1.5 hours. Each panelist will deliver a 15-minute presentation on various aspects of the main topic. After these presentations, we will transition into a Q&A session where we'll have the opportunity our panelists will have the opportunity to address questions from the audience. We really encourage you to actively participate by submitting your questions through the chat feature. We hope this interactive format allows for dynamic exchange of ideas and fosters engagement between the speakers and the attendees. Really looking forward to your insightful queries. And to be honest, to close this introduction, I'm really excited to facilitate this timely event with our esteemed panelists, to whom I once again I'd like to extend my warmest welcome. Before diving into the discussion itself, just allow me a second to introduce our guests in the order that will speak. Unfortunately, by the way, I just remember, I have to tell you that that Ambassador Sidikou has had a last-minute emergency. He must attend and will not be able to join us today. In any case, we're honored to host three highly skilled, experienced, and knowledgeable experts. First up is Ms. Beatriz de Leon Cobo, who's a researcher and analyst specializing in security, conflict dynamics, and violent radicalization in West Africa and the Sahel. She worked as a conflict justice and security advisor for First Call Partners, and she's also a fellow at the Royal United Services Institute in the UK. I almost forgot, she also directs the dialogue forum between Sahel and Europe at University Francisco de Vitoria in Madrid, Spain. Bienvenida, Beatriz. Second up next is Mr. Ulf Laessing, who's the head of the Sahel program at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, the Konrad-Adenauer-Foundation. Before becoming the head of Sahel program, he worked for 13 years as a foreign correspondent and bureau chief for Reuters in the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And he's also the author of the book Understanding Libya Since Gaddafi, which I really recommend you to read if you haven't yet. Willkommen, Herr Laessing. And last but not least, of course, we have with us today Mr. Philip van Amersfoort, who has been working as an EU official since 1994, and in 2022 was appointed as head of the Secretariat of the Partnership for Security and Stability in the Sahel. Bienvenue, Monsieur van Amersfoort. And before really leaving the panel, the floor to our four panelists, just a quick contextualizing introduction with a question, if I may. Why is it important to organize an event focusing on the reconfiguration of the security situation, the security landscape in the Sahel. So, as I'm sure you all know, security structures are undergoing a profound transformation in the region. Now, the year 2023 really marked the end of an era, if I may. Key bilateral and multilateral security and peacekeeping mechanisms not so long ago hailed as the bulwark against extremism and in place for nearly a decade were dissolved. It is true that at a certain point, the myriad of initiatives adopted by the various summits and fostered by different international partners to address the security crisis seem like challenging to coordinate. Now, ensuring consistency, coherence, and complementarity between these initiatives has finally proven an insurmountable conundrum, to just use one more time this tricky word in the title. The G5 Sahel, Operation Barkhan, the Takuba Task Force, the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, commonly referred to, of course, as MINUSMA, but also capacity building missions such as UCAP Sahel, are just some examples of different security structures dismantled in 2023. Or even more recently, because the United States has recently announced that the approximately 1,000 American military personnel will also leave Niger before September, shutting a 110 million recently built air base, of course, after being asked to depart the country. Therefore, like, excuse me, characterizing, or the way I see it, characterizing the Western strategy for the region as flawed no longer appears to be an overly biased assessment. Although until fairly recently, diplomats from different countries were still confident that the approach based on supporting democracy and reinforcing governance while working on the reform of security forces would bear fruits, optimism has really evaporated quickly in the face of recent events, as it is evidenced by different military coups that toppled civilian-led governments in Mali, in Burkina, in Niger, etc., etc. After a decade, it is fair to assess that with thousands of millions of dollars or euros spent in fostering a security and democratization cooperation-based approach, those efforts have largely failed. The region has witnessed a growing wave of anti-colonialism, primarily directed at French influence, but not only. A sentiment that, of course, Russia has actively worked to intensify through various disinformation campaigns. This sentiment has become a key factor exploited by the military juntas to solidify their control over the situation. But the outcome of this is clear. The way I see it, it is an explicit distancing from the West. The evolving scenario has allowed Russia's security involvement to expand rapidly, primarily through the Wagner Group. Now, Wagner forces train, provide security services, and even participate in combat operations across the Sahel. These activities, however, have already raised concerns about human rights abuses, thereby undermining public trust in governments. Although less visible, China has also expanded its security involvement through military aid and even peacekeeping missions. However, unlike Russia, China's approach is, in my opinion, more subtle, often intertwined with its economic pursuits. However, although both actors address immediate concerns for some governments in the region, long-term implications for regional stability are at least worrisome. And although not the main topic today, it is important to highlight the challenge posed by terrorism. Arguably, the main reason why most of the now dismantled structures were initially established. Just to provide some perspective through statistics, through numbers, according to the Global Terrorism Index, in 2008, when Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb first established a permanent presence in Mali, the region accounted for only 1% of global terrorism-related deaths. Today, this figure has risen up to 48%. And not just that, sorry. 5 of the 10 countries most affected by terrorism in 2023 are in the Sahel. 7 of the 10 deadliest attacks worldwide last year took place in the Sahel. In addition, a reality that should not be ignored is that the geographical range of action of some of these organizations, some of these jihadi organizations, has extended to coastal countries of the Gulf of Guinea. Now, this is but a general introduction to situate our informed audience and succinctly answer the question of why is it important to put the focus on the reconfiguration of the security landscape in the region. However, to delve deeper into this subject, and without further delay, let me give the floor to the first of our panelists, Ms. Beatriz de Leon.
Thank you very much, Sergio. Thank you for the invitation also of the GW program on extremism. It's an honor to be here with you this afternoon or morning, depending on where you follow us from. After Sergio has already basically tell most of the topics that I was planning to discuss today, I am going to try to focus on what I believe have been the strategic shifts of the Sahel of the past 12 months and how those have affected the security architecture. So for that, I'm going to divide the 15 minutes I have ahead of me on basically 2 main parts. First, I'm going to briefly talk about the regional dynamics, which are very important because now we cannot understand the Sahel without also looking at the further coastal states and West Africa dynamics. And secondly, I'm going to touch upon the specific dynamics of Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Niger. I will not talk about the 2011 Libyan crisis that started and therefore started insecurity in the Sahel. I'm going to mainly focus specifically on this last year. But if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to go further if needed. So starting by the diplomatic shifts of the region. So the first and main event that happened last year, and we will touch upon when we arrive to Niger, is the coup d'etat in Niger in July 2023. That marked a beginning of what has already happened on the region for the past over 2 or 3 years, which is a strategic shift from the Sahelian governance regarding what they consider to be their partners. So Niger was the main ally of the West until July, when the government, when there was a coup d'etat, and therefore there was a new military junta in place. After that, for the first time, I will dare to say on the past at least 20 years, we've seen the ECOWAS, the regional organization, taking extremely seriously this coup d'etat, that obviously it's an unconstitutional coup, and Bazoum, the president of Niger, was arrested and is still arrested up to today, and he hasn't been able to go out. In that moment, ECOWAS took it very seriously and started not only sanctioning Niger, but also decided to threaten it military. So at some point between July and November, there was a highly chance of ECOWAS forces from Senegal all the way to Benin entering into Niger territory to restore Bazoum's legitimate presidency. That shifted completely the regional dynamics. Mali and Burkina Faso, as a reaction of that, signed with Niger. As you all know, Mali and Burkina are also military juntas that came from coups. So the 3 of them in September 2023 signed the Alliance of the Sahelian State, and a strategic alliance which first and foremost was a security alliance that was trying to avoid, if a potential military intervention were to happen in Niger from ECOWAS or from the international community, they will be there to defend it. So this was a strategic massive shift for West Africa. And that the continuation of that was a lot of decisions that were made by these 3 juntas that, of course, affect highly the West. So the first one was that the 3 countries pulled off the G5 Sahel. It was fairly obvious, but by that point, that the G5 Sahel has really suffered. But it's true that at some point between September and January, before the juntas decided to pull out of ECOWAS, they decided first and foremost to pull out from the G5 Sahel. Afterwards, as I was just mentioning a second ago, on January 2024, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso decided to leave ECOWAS. They made this decision with immediate effect. We know right now, 5-6 months later, that this has not been in immediate effect, but we can all imagine that during this 2024, probably the negotiations between ECOWAS and these three countries are going to take place, and therefore that's going to have massive impact, not only for the three Sahelian countries, but also for the region. These impacts go between economic, but also societal impacts, because as you probably all know, over 1 million Sahelians are living in Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and all of them obviously work very closely in terms of migration, but also border needs, everything related with commerce, businesses. So this is going to truly impact the region. And the main question for both sectors, both the Alliance d'État Sahel, Sahelian State Alliance sector, and also ECOWAS, is if this is going to be just a political decision, or they're going to exit also the UEMOA, which is the monetary union. And for all of you that are European, I just to put an example that could be easier for you to understand, ECOWAS is so deep and integrated as, or almost as, it's the European Union. So this is something very serious. This is not just leaving a political union. This could have massive repercussions in the economy. So having said that, the Alliance d'État Sahel has decided to further integrate themselves. So they've been signing quite a few documents to do strategic partnerships. Also in the security sector, they started to conduct operations again together, because it's true, as you probably touch upon, Sergio, in other webinars, jihadism as transnational crime do not see borders. So therefore, the border integration and border security, and having both countries being as interoperable as possible is very important. So the issue that the Alliance d'État Sahel has definitely been something positive on that regard. But unfortunately, they have also decided to have a similar diplomatic agenda. And that's why, after the alliance was formed, you could see that, for example, some decisions that France had made on the past, for example, to stop some agreements with France, immediately afterwards, Burkina and Niger follow, etc. So you can see they're not only integrating on the security panorama, they're also integrated in this strategy that Mali started in 2021, which is the diversification of strategic partnerships. Essentially, this strategy says something fairly simple to understand. That is that all these states are sovereign states, and therefore they can choose whomever partnership they wish, and they do not necessarily have to have a partnership for everything. They can have multiple partners for multiple things, and therefore it's completely in its rights to decide to have, as an example, Australia as a partner in everything related to agriculture, but also Germany as a partner in everything related to education, and also Russia in everything related to security. And that should be fine, because they are sovereign state. The problem with that way of engaging with partners is that the West, or the traditional partners, hasn't seen it as clearly, because when you are engaging with some partners that have different standards in everything related with human rights abuses, or, for example, democracy expectations, then is where tensions can happen. And I'm not going to enter into the whole crisis of France and Mali, and France and Burkina, France and Niger debacle, but happy to enter into those. But the most important thing is that the three countries right now have this way of conceiving relationship with partners, which is diversification of partnerships, and they put a lot of emphasis in the win-win partnerships. So partnerships as equal, and nothing before the coups is necessarily solid. They are revising and revisiting every single partnership they have from before. And this is not only on the three countries of the Central Sahel. This is something that it's also happening across West Africa. We see, for example, in the new president of Senegal, similar dynamics and similar narrative in the way of engaging. So having said that, and knowing that there's other speakers that are going to further more the Russia role, Russia strategy, and the diversification of partnerships and Russia, I'm going to stop there and enter into the main dynamics of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, which I think are absolutely important to be able to understand what is happening right now. So apart from the diversification of partnerships in Mali, I think it's important to also understand what's the socio-political situation right now as of 2024, what is going on, to be able to understand the impacts that all of that has within the security sector. So main things that has happened this last year, apart from what we've already discussed of the ECOWAS withdrawal and the Alliance de Sahel, is one of the main things is the fact that the civic space has been restricted further, especially with the prohibition of the political parties that happened a couple of months ago. It's true that this transitional government had an election date that then they decided to postpone. This year they had a dialogue, a national dialogue, and there is not a clear view on when these elections are going to be held, and that has a lot of impact within the population that are starting to claim for elections, or at least for some sort of transitional way, because there is an unclear path to follow. So that's where we are right now on the political side. There was a window of opportunity to organize these elections, I believe, which was after the second main event that has happened this year, which is the fact that after the exit of MINUSMA in August, the Tuareg armed groups, some of the Tuareg signatory armed groups from the Algiers Accord, starting clashing again with the Malian government from September to November, and those clashes finished with the arrival of Malian forces and Wagner forces to Kidal around November 2023, and in January the government decided to exit the Algiers Accords, and since then to now we are seeing clashes between some of the signatory movements and the government of Mali. And just to remind the people of the audience that they don't know, the Tuareg revolutions, I think we are on the 4th or 5th Tuareg revolution since the 60s, and it's a problem that hasn't really properly finished being dealt with. And unfortunately, this coming up of the clashes, it's something very significant for Mali, as there was, in theory, some sort of peace in 2015. So why is all these dynamics important? Because it's true that in November, the president of Mali, the president of the transition, had a moment where he was very popular within the South, and therefore elections could have been held. But instead of that, there weren't. And now everyone is waiting after this Malian dialogue organized a couple of months ago, what is next on the political side. So on the security side, Malian government is spending most of their time and their energy and their resources with their pacification strategy, peaceman strategy. That's how it will be called in English. And this is very important because through those lens, you understand most of the decisions is being made by the Malian junta right now. So this strategy, especially, you could see it very well developed the second that they enter into Kidal in November 2023. And this strategy mainly uses three key things. So the first one is obviously the Malian forces. The second one is the Russian/Africa Corps/all Barner Associates, whatever you prefer calling it. And the third one, and this is a new one, is aerotactical, which they didn't have in other revolutions, or they didn't have before, to be able to fight jihadism. And this is very important and very recent, and it's done with one of the key strategic partners of Mali, which is Turkey. So the Bayraktar drones are being highly used right now by the counterterrorism operations of the Malian state. A new challenge they're having, and this is fairly recent, is that some of the signatory groups of the Algiers Accord, the Tuareg groups that are right now in fight against the Malian government, has recently signed a non-aggression accord with one of the Al-Qaeda affiliate groups, the JNIM, on the region, and this could also have repercussions on both groups, as if they share resources, they're probably going to have an easier time to be able to do operations against the Malian government. So that's where we are right now in Mali, and it's important that I expanded myself a bit in Mali because I do believe this is going to link very well with Burkina and Niger. So Burkina Faso is probably, in my opinion, and I think the data backs fairly me in saying this assessment, is the most catastrophic situation in the Sahel in terms of human lives lost, in terms of humanitarian crisis, and in terms of just horrific situations that we are living right now. And this is mainly because of three key security factors. So the first one is the fact that the jihadist groups have over more or less, there's a debate on the percentage, but 60% of the territory. And also the fact that the counterterrorism strategy used by the Burkina Faso government is also creating quite a lot of casualties and also making lots of citizens decide to join these armed groups to fight against the Burkinabe government. And the third is the overall instability, which is also political and is the one that I wanted to share with you right now, which is the fact that every 4 months in September, there seems to be a almost coup d'etat, or at least something that happens within the Burkinabe palace, because there is detentions of opposition leaders, detentions of generals, of military, and this means that the political side of the Burkinabe junta is actually quite unstable at the moment. And any day right now, the Burkinabe junta could fall, though it's true that they have quite a big control on the intelligence side. So it seems that it's very difficult to actually organize an opposition. The second thing they're using after April 2023, they are using this decree that they passed that is called the General Mobilization Decree, where they can send to the front to fight against jihadists any single citizen of Burkina Faso. This is a law that still shocks me every time I read out loud, because this means that essentially anyone can be forcibly conscripted to go to the front, and this has been the case for every activist, political leader, even all ministers have been asked to go to the front to fight jihadists. Of course, they force them because they believe, and if in Mali was the case, in Burkina is even more the case. They believe that the main reason, raison d'être in French, the main reason to be for the Burkinabe junta is to fight against terrorism. That's their main threat, and they are mobilizing every single resource they have to fight against terrorism. So this means that the civic space political situation is actually even harder than in Mali, and unfortunately that also has quite a lot of repercussions within the ground, as both factions are quite scared of joining either the Burkinabe forces or the jihadis, because they believe that they have really not a good option to be able to survive in this panorama, especially on the rural areas. Having said that, and just to finalize on this point, the Traoré strategy, the Burkinabe president strategy, has completely shifted in comparison with their predecessors. He has understood very well that having a contingent of 200 soldiers sent to the front to fight against Jainim, against Al-Qaeda-linked groups or Daesh-linked groups, it's not a proper strategy, because every time they were in a camp, they were massively attacked, and that's why we had a few coups in Burkina Faso, because of all the deaths on the security forces side. So he has decided to design these light battalions that are going everywhere on the ground, and they're conducting city operations, accompanied by the volunteers for the homeland, which is this pseudo-militia group integrated within the army that are trained 2 weeks and given a weapon and asked to go to fight jihadis. And those are a lot, are over 50,000 volunteers for the homeland. And then the third one, and this is again very important, the aerial component, because since a couple of months ago, Burkina Faso has now also Bayraktar drones. So having said that, we see that Mali and Burkina, more or less, ones with more emphasis in the national militia and the other ones with more emphasis on Russia, Wagner, have a strategy or a similar strategy to fight against terrorism. Niger strategy is still on the making. So we'll give it at least a few months to be able to assess what has been the strategic shift between before and now. But what we can say about Niger right now is that they spend quite a lot of months just dealing with the retaliation of sanctions of the international community, where they could barely pay any salaries. And at least now with the pipeline from China, they are able to pay the salaries, and they're focusing back on what's to do next in terms of transition. But it's still, Niger junta is still in very early stages. the most strategic change for Niger has been the massive change of partnerships. They've kicked out French forces, they kicked out American forces, they kicked out European forces, and now they are inviting in Russia. So that's the panorama we have right now, but we don't really know what's going to be the strategic decisions in terms of counterterrorism operations from Niger, though, and it's very important to remember, the highest number of deaths is in Burkina Faso, then in Mali, then in Niger. And Niger is way below. So it's not the same kind of situations that we're dealing with. And the only, and with this, Sergio, I promise I will finish thing I will say is that in Niger, on a few months ago, they decided to eliminate one of the biggest law for Europe, which was the penalization, the criminalization of human trafficking. And now that's open again. And therefore, we don't know what are the consequences that's going to have in human trafficking towards Europe, but also to the Maghreb. And with that, I will finish. I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you so much for the time, Sergio. Sorry that I talked 5 minutes more than I should. Thank you.
No, nothing to be sorry. Thank you very much, Beatriz. And I bear full responsibility for telling you you can go from 15 to 20 minutes. Really, thank you for providing such a detailed description of the current situation. Now, in order to delve deeper into the geopolitical changes that have taken place, and specifically in the rise of new players such as Russia, replacing the West when it comes to main partner in security, I yield the floor to Mr. Ulf Laessing. Mr. Laessing, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. It's a real honor. Yeah, I will try to build up a bit on what Beatriz said. So I'm based in Mali since November 21. I mean, that was then, it was still, Mali was relatively close to the West, especially to France. There was a peacekeeping operation in place, all these training missions, which you mentioned, UBAM, Sahel. But since then, everything has changed. Now, if you look at the landscape from Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, it's Russia. I mean, Mr. Lavrov, the foreign minister, was last week here. He even visited Chad, which is one of the closest allies on France. So it's interesting to look a bit at the dynamics. Why is Russia so successful? What do they have to, what the West can't offer? I think there are a couple of points. There's a certain fatigue here in the region with France. It's just the way it is. It's, as colonial baggage, and France, as Britain, never really, quit their colonies. They always, were very active, working with elites, joint currency, Francophonie. So they were relatively close. And there's, in the population here, when I arrived in Mali, I noticed this, there's a really, France is being accused of being too close to the political elites in Mali or in Burkina Faso or Niger, which at the end are kind of responsible for the mess that the countries are in. So this was the first reason why I think there was a bit of skepticism among Malians to continue working with France. Also, I think the Western countries contributed a bit to their getting sidelined, by, agreeing in all these missions, from, training the Malian police or the army, or setting up a peacekeeping operation with 13,000 soldiers, staff in the northern Mali, or then you have the French Barkhane anti-terror operation, which had at its peak more than 6,000 soldiers. And then in Niger, you have the American drone bases. Americans were until recently also in Chad. This all created a bit the wrong, perception, among, local population, where we're thinking, wow, we have the most powerful armies in the world are on the ground, so they surely must be able to defeat jihadists. But that was never possible without the contribution from, the Sahelian countries. I mean, Mali, let's face it, also Niger or Burkina Faso, they're almost failed states. They power and budgets are concentrated in the capitals. They never really developed the, rural areas. And after France, soldiers, pushed back the jihadists from northern Mali, which they had taken over in 2012. That was really the chance for the Malian state to, to show a presence, to build up state services, and This didn't happen because, you know, there are structural, you know, problems with governance in Mali. It's very corrupt, very inefficient system. So that kind of, you know, frustrated in the Western countries because they didn't see the Malians, you know, doing their part while they were sending the soldiers or, you know, running one of the largest peacekeeping operations in the world. And and on the Malian side, they were complaining that Western countries weren't taking them seriously. They were also asking for lethal weapons, helicopters, jets, ammunition. You know, Western countries were reluctant to provide this, for citing the human rights records of the Malian army. And that kind of contributed to this stalemate. The security situation in Mali was, you know, worsening year after year. And the Malian side also a bit contributed to the narrative that, you know, the Westerners, you know, didn't really do their part, why they wanted to, you know, overlook a bit that they themselves as Malian state weren't really able to, or hadn't done their part to restore order and law or establish a state presence in northern Mali where the jihadists were there. So this was the overall context, and this has been exploited by Russia. I mean, Russia has been for several years investing in disinformation campaigns. They have a network of so-called influencers on social media, very active. They work also with local influencers to push certain narratives like, look, these Western armies, they're failing. They're not your partners. They're like, you know, colonialists, but we as Russia, we are better. So that created a bit of a more positive image of Russia, which they managed to exploit. Also, in 21 in August, there was this abrupt, withdrawal of Western forces from Afghanistan, from Kabul. We all remember these pictures, you know, and that also contributed to a bit to the perception among the Malians that maybe at some point France and the other Western partners we have might not be so reliable. So they were looking for alternatives, and then Russia was there and kind of offered themselves, when the second month I was here, end of December 21, the first Wagner mercenaries already arrived. They were also sending helicopters. All these things the Malians had been, demanding from Western nations, which they didn't want. The Westerners were a bit like with a handbrake. Yes, we're sending soldiers, but we don't want to fight with you. We train your soldiers, but please, you need to use branches from trees. We can't give you real guns because we think you're killing too many people. So that all, created frustrations on the Malian side, and the Russians, they were just there to exploit it. And Mali was the first step. Then there were two coups in 2020 in Burkina Faso. The second one, from day one, the new ruler or military ruler was very sympathetic to Russia. Also, apart from these social media campaigns, Russia had invested in local groups, like small groups nobody really knew anything about. But they're always there when a coup is underway, like in Burkina Faso, it was for several days, but also then in Niger. Then suddenly you have all these Russian flags. They're basically, Russia is quite clever in that, setting up local groups. Nobody takes them seriously, but when there's a coup underway and suddenly the main theme is be against the West, and suddenly these Russian flags appear. So I don't think Russia had a direct role in the coup in Niger last year, but they were very, very, fast with their, social media activities and their local groups on the ground to shape the narrative, really push it towards, claiming that France was trying to, invade the country to restore the ousted president Bazoum. That really gave the putschist oxygen to, building on this existing anti-French sentiment, and with the help of the Russians to sharpen these divisions even further. And Niger is really, from a European perspective, it's really a tragedy. I mean, Beatrice has mentioned it. I went twice this year to Agadez in the north. That is the main smuggler hub. It's the main point from where migrants go to Algeria and Libya. And there's a huge increase since then because Russia agreed with Niger on a military cooperation deal. It was in end of November or December last year. And at the same week, Niger then decided to get rid of this law which was banning, human trafficking or helping any migration from Niger to Libya. And since then, numbers have been surging. So from January to end of April, some 160,000 migrants have been going from Agadez to Libya or to Algeria. Many are just Nigerians who seek work in Libya, but obviously there's a lot of pressure now building up. That's why the European Union is so busy at the moment making deals with Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, or even Lebanon to make sure that boats with migrants get stopped. So I mean, from a strategic perspective, Russia has really done everything right. They're now very pretty much in control, I would say, or have close relationship with Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. Interesting, they are also, trying to get Chad. Chad is one of the closest French allies in the region. There's, French soldiers since independence there, and it's one of these countries where France has this a bit dodgy relationship with elites. 2019, when there was rebels, trying to overthrow the president, then French jets stopped this rebel column. So it was this kind of complete survival package. And that's interesting that even there the Russian making inroads, because you have the same criticism of Western countries there. And it's also a bit of a failure of Europe, I have to say. Because in Niger, I'm not sure that they really wanted from day one to work with Russia. They didn't want to work with France anymore for historic reasons, but they were ready with the other European countries. But then it took ages for the European Union to reach out to the new Niger government. Still right now, the German ambassador is not accredited because the government has been very reluctant to get involved with Niger, following basically France leads. French President Emmanuel Macron was outraged about this coup because the Nigerian President Bazoum was one of the closest allies of France in the region. And so, I mean, the European Union is basically blocked, has suspended all their development work and military assistance in Niger, apart from humanitarian help. This got then, an opening to Russia, who basically filled this void relatively quickly. Iran is there as well. Just one example. I mean, Niger was really it was always pro-Western, and we did so many events there, and we're actually about to open a bureau in the week before the coup. And the one hotel where we always did our events, was promoting democracy, all these things. Recently you had Iranian delegations there. So it's really, it's astounding how fast Western influence has collapsed, and right now they're trying very hard to convince Chad to also end the relationship with the West. I mean, they already asked American troops to leave before the elections, and I think they're also going to ask France to at least to reduce its footprint. So I think what we need in the future is a bit more a European Union who has a bit more of a more active role, who not just follows France lead, who was also willing to take on some responsibility. It's very easy to criticize France, but then the French, they're the only one willing to do anything in the Sahel, like in 2013 when it was about to expel the jihadists from northern Mali. But the other Europeans like Italy, Spain, Germany, they all hide a bit of France. If France doesn't do anything, the European Union is very inactive, and the result you can really see in Niger, where this boycott on European level to work with the new putschists. The idea was we can impress them by boycotting them, but the world has changed. The new Nigerian rulers, they just said, okay, fine, Europe, we don't need you anymore. We have Russia, we have Turkey, Iran. Everybody wants to do business with us. If we don't need you now. And you can see it now with Russia. The latest I heard today, Russian media reporting that Russia even wants to open a military base in Niger. I hope that is not true, because now Niger being the main transit route for migrants going from sub-Saharan Africa to Libya and Algeria via Agadez, if the Russians have footprints there, they can actively really encourage migration the way they're doing it already in other borders like Belarus, in Poland or Finland, Russia, where they keep sending, using migration as a weapon to undermine Europe. And yeah, with that, I wanted to close. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ulf, for such enlightening insights on the current situation from your experience, very large in general in Sahel and North Africa now from the ground. And finally, to close the first round of intervention, sorry, I pass the floor to Mr. Philippe van Amersfoort. I apologize even if I tried, not even once I could pronounce your surname correctly. But considering your vast experience and knowledge, you'll definitely provide a really insightful picture regarding what are the lessons learned from previous engagements and which are the partners to which or to which parameters to frame it better should partners adapt given the current context, of course, from a European perspective, given your current position, of course.
Okay, no, thank you, Sergio. Well, the pronunciation was almost perfect, so don't worry about this. So thank you very much for inviting us to this very timely event. This conversation is taking place at a time when a lot of reassessments are on the way at the EU level, in the international community, on the future prospects of our cooperation, our security engagement in the Sahel. Alors, two words maybe on where I'm speaking from. I'm working for the Partnership for Security and Stability in the Sahel, which is an initiative of the International Coalition for the Sahel, managed by the EU. So embedded in the EU diplomatic service, but basically which aims to provide space for consultation, cooperation on security and stabilization in the Sahel. So we've got one foot in the diplomatic service of the EU and one foot in the International Coalition for the Sahel. What I would like to do, if you agree, is maybe to complement the excellent presentations made by Beatrice and Ulf by sharing some comments, some thoughts on the challenges and the dilemmas that the international partners of the Sahel, including the EU, are facing in the region when it comes to security cooperation. And I think that the first point, which maybe we should make, is that we are dealing, international partners of the Sahel are dealing with a very fluid political and security environment. Our challenge basically is to adjust policies while the old is not dead and the new cannot be born. So we are trying to revisit and to adapt our strategies to a new political reality. We are trying to chart a new course of action, but the context of all this is extremely fluid, unpredictable. And some of the regimes we are dealing with may see their lifespan not to be too long, or at least even if they are deeply entrenched, it is difficult to devise new policy in such a context. Another challenge and a source of dilemmas for international actors, international partners of the Sahel, including the EU, is to pursue our security objectives, to protect, to promote our interests in an environment where basically our partnership has broken down. That was mentioned by Beatrice, by Ulf, in 3 countries of the region of Central Sahel. International cooperation from the EU at least, but that affects also the US in Niger, the UN in Mali with MINUSMA. International cooperation is no longer welcome. So the question for us is to what extent and how should we work with basically hostile authorities? We are basically facing a dilemma where we want to keep the door open to cooperation. The EU, most international partners of the EU want to remain engaged in the Sahel, but there are counterterrorism strategies that we do not want to endorse. there are regimes we do not want to lend legitimacy to, and there are strategies we don't want to support because basically we believe these are not sustainable or winning strategies. And all this has very practical implications for international partners, for the EU, and I can give you a few examples of these dilemmas, of these political or moral dilemmas. The EU, for instance, the EU member states have rejected providing weapons to the Volontaires pour la Défense de la Patrie, these militias in Burkina Faso, and the EU mission, the EU training mission, the military mission in Mali has refused to provide pre-deployment training for the armed forces of Mali that would be called to participate in combat operations alongside Wagner or other Russian operators in Mali. So we need to adapt to this new context, these new challenges. And while we can accept the idea that our partners in the Sahel are seeking a diversification of their partnerships, the question of whether it is acceptable for us in the EU in particular to coexist with strategic competitors or actors who pursue an agenda which is not shared is a big question. I think in such a context, it is also important to bear in mind or to acknowledge, to recognize that our role, the role of international partners, is modest. Many of the challenges of the Sahel are political. They call for political solutions, political settlement. And I think we should be realistic about what we can achieve and give space to the agency within these countries, acknowledge that most of the solutions to the region's challenges will come from within. And in that context, it is important for us to see strong African leadership to help resolving the multifaceted crisis in the Sahel. The so-called African solutions to African problems, we still believe this is quite important to see. In that respect, I just wanted to mention the work of the UN and African Union Issoufou panel before it vanished following the coup in Niger, but that was probably a welcome initiative in that respect to try and reactivate some African and UN reflection on finding responses to the long-term challenges of the Sahel. Last but not least, when it comes to all these challenges we are currently facing, well, the implosion, the quasi-dissolution of the G5 Sahel has deprived the EU and some international partners of a key partner to channel our support. And we believe at this point that the alliance of Sahel states cannot provide an alternative partner for us at this point. Now, looking at security in the Sahel in particular and the EU perspectives, well, first of all, peace and security on the African continent has always been a priority for the EU. The Sahel in particular has been a particularly important theater for EU peace, security and defense engagement in the last decades. And I would say that it has been quite instrumental in efforts by the EU to assert its role as a global security provider. Now, as was mentioned, the end of the EU's military training mission, EUTM Mali last month, the upcoming closing of our military mission in Niger at the end of this month, will mark the end of military assistance under an EU flag in the region. Only our civilian mission will remain, a CAP as we call it, in Mali, and some limited bilateral presence from some EU member states when it comes to security cooperation. And I think a key paradox is that the opportunities for cooperation are decreasing. The political space available for such cooperation is decreasing, is shrinking at a time when security challenges are rising in the region. Coordinated attacks by terrorist groups in the north and east of Burkina are intensifying. The withdrawal of MINUSMA from Mali, the end of the EU and US military presence in Niger, the engagement of Russian mercenaries, which has increased the exposure of civilians to violence by armed actors. All these doesn't bode well for the region. And what we see is that the militarized approach to counter insurgency followed by some of the regimes of the region is likely to continue to fuel escalatory dynamics. So at this very moment, as I said, there is a lot of reassessment, a lot of revisiting of what the posture, the engagement of international partners in the Sahel should be. And I think in all these reflections, it's also important to start from the lessons learned of our past engagement. And once again, I'm not speaking on behalf of the EU here, but I wanted to share maybe some of the key lessons that international partners or the EU have been drawing from their past engagement. And I think one of the first lessons we've been able to draw is that military responses alone cannot provide a sustainable solution to the multiple challenges of the region. So our toolbox should not be reduced to military assistance missions, to military cooperation. I think it needs to be embedded in a broader, what we call in the EU, integrated approach to conflict and crisis, which includes conflict prevention, peace, mediation and dialogue, as well as stabilization. And military support, security cooperation also needs to be complemented by the provision of hardware, equipment. It needs to be accompanied or embedded in a clear vision of security sector reform, DDR, as well as the capacity building of internal security forces. I think a second lesson basically we've drawn, at least on the EU side, is that in volatile political security situations, in volatile, fluid political and situation which are quite unpredictable, we should design military or civilian missions with a lighter footprint, missions, assistance missions, which are more reactive, reversible, and scalable. And responsiveness is particularly important. We should be able to deploy advanced teams quickly to engage or re-engage whenever we believe the conditions are ripe. And last year, the EU launched a new security and defense initiative, a cooperation initiative for the Gulf of Guinea, for the coastal states. And we believe that this new model of cooperation, light footprint, reactive, reversible, scalable, is probably one possible way forward. Another important aspect in our current reflection is that we believe it is important to press the governments of the region to prioritize the protection of their populations and to explore non-military solutions to insecurity, notably through dialogue with these affected communities and groups, and to work on judicial responses to terrorism. We believe that some mediation initiatives at the local level, which do not involve direct support to the national authorities in Niger, Mali, and Burkina, should be pursued. That there is still space to advance such an agenda. As I said, the implosion or the quasi-dissolution of the G5 Sahel has made a regional anchor for our cooperation vanish, disappear. It has deprived the EU in particular of a key partner to channel our support. And one of the conclusions we should probably draw is that regional and bilateral approach should be better coordinated, that they should not depend on each other, and we need to make sure that when one door closes, the other remains open. And this is why at the EU level in particular, there is work underway to intensify bilateral engagement, cooperation with the partners of the countries with the countries of the Sahel, along a differentiated approach where it is politically possible. But we are also still keen to intensify or to keep a dialogue with Mauritania as current chair of the G5 Sahel, which is still legally alive, to assess their level of ambition for reactivating or reinventing a cooperation structure at regional level, possibly on the basis of the G5. And we also believe it is important to preserve some of the gains, the acquis, as we say in French, of the G5, in particular, for example, the work of the Sahel Defense College, the G5 College. Last but not least, I think it is also important for our engagement in the region to build upon the strong partnerships we have established with the UN, with the African Union, and with organizations such as ECOWAS. Deeper integration between the UN and the African Union will ultimately be beneficial to the EU's peace and partnership and security partnership with the African Union. And we are in particular trying to step up dialogue with Mauritania again as current chair of the African Union, notably in the light of the African Union's ambition to boost its peace building capacities. And the EU, as you may know, has also been a strong partner of the ECOWAS peace and security architecture. One last aspect, one last thing maybe I wanted to mention is that in all this ongoing revisiting or reflection underway on how to engage in the Sahel, the whole issue of strategic communications has been is quite important. EU missions in the Sahel have been considered legally and politically legitimate. However, what we've seen is that deficiencies in strategic communication, as well as hostile foreign information manipulation and disinformation, mean that their credibility or acceptability in the public eye, in public opinion, can be low. So we need to invest more in Stratcom, in strategic communications in the Sahel and as elsewhere. Well, these were just a few thoughts I wanted to share to feed into our collective conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philippe. It is very interesting intervention, bringing a bit of background from the EU. As I mentioned at the beginning of the event, we are now opening the Q&A session. So before we proceed to the audience questions, I would like to direct a brief question myself to each of our speakers today. However, I encourage you to start sending the questions so I can organize them, and our panelists, while other colleagues do take their time to answer my question, can pick those questions they'd like to ask to you. I please beg you try to be concise in your answers to my questions, to leave some more room for the questions from the audience, because these are questions that I'm sure we could discuss for hours. So my first question, I will follow the same order of your intervention, is although Philip already pretty much answered, I would like to throw the same question or a similar question to you, Beatriz. What would be your recommendation for Western partners to try to integrate again the strategic partnerships when it comes to security and defense?
It's a tricky question. I think I will try to do it from a different angle, as I fairly agree with Philippe in everything he said, especially his last point about the Stratcoms, but I'll try to do it from a different angle. I think it's about understanding the massive reshapes of the Sahel. And I think, unfortunately, when we do a strategies, we do it long-term as Europeans with the strategy of the European Union from 2020 to 2025. But when in the Sahel happens something so massive, such as 5 coup d'etats and a completely swift on partnerships and ideas, we need to be much more agile to react to all of that. We cannot continue seeing everything with the old lens, because as Sahelians told me all the time, we are not relevant anymore. Just a very quick anecdote. After the 1999 coup d'etat in Niger, the Niger government, after having assassinated his old president, obviously were in a very difficult situation in terms of transition, and they asked, they were massively sanctioned by the Western international community, and they asked for money to be able to pay the salaries. And back then, the European Union, the West, did have the political buy-in to be able to do something about it, to be able to convince the military junta to go back to transition. Now, with the $400 million from the Chinese, the Niger junta can do whatever they want. And I think as Europeans, we need to understand that our leverage is different, and we are in a free market right now. But as Philippe said, and I think we've mentioned it before, we cannot say yes to everything. We do still have standards and value, and we are also in charge of what are the partnerships we want to do and under which conditions. And I feel one of the lessons I will add into Philippe's lessons learned is the lack of accountability sometimes that we had with those governments. We see them as shining armors when they decide to go in line with European values, but sometimes that didn't translate to the ground, or we didn't really see the problems beyond the main political actors. We didn't see the problems of the country, and I think that happened with Niger, and I think we could have predicted that coup. So this is to say, European and Western partnership has to be much more agile, has to understand better the dynamics, and has to look through new lens these conflicts, not necessarily accepting everything that the military juntas wants to do or wish to do, but it is important not to burn all the bridges, and some of, unfortunately, Western partners are doing right now. We need to continue developing as much as possible the relationship in this complex panorama, but not at all costs, and ensuring what do we want from them. Because one of the things they tell us all the time is that we weren't necessarily clear on what we wanted from them. And I think Turkey's China, Russia, even Japan are clearer on the messages to the military juntas that we were at some point. So I think we need to be more transparent, more equal, more clear into what we need from them, and not at all costs, obviously. So I hope those complement Philippe's recommendations, which again, I completely agree with. Thank you.
Because they do indeed. Yes, I didn't silence my microphone, sorry. My question to you, Ulf, would be, now, given that Russia's growing security presence is marked by clear setbacks in accountability and especially competition with the West in several fields, how do you foresee this situation evolving? What do you see as an outcome of this growing competition?
Yeah, I mean, for now, the Russians are in the driving seat. They give these military governments what they want, from be it, mercenaries or weapons, which the West obviously can't and shouldn't be doing. I think what's even more dangerous, because I don't think this Russian military offensive assistance will be more successful than what the West has been trying, or France, or the peacekeeping mission is just the challenges are too big, and you have maybe 1,000 Russian mercenaries in Mali. It's impossible. They will achieve more than the French, who had 4,000 in its peak. And also, like Philippe says, there's no military solution anyway. You need at some point to make peace with these parts of the jihadist groups. There's no military solution. But I think what's more dangerous with Russia is they invest a lot of not just disinformation. They now have, reached out to, give grants for students to study in Russia. Cultural institutes are opening, and there's one now here, Russia House in Bamako, also one in Ouagadougou and Niger as well. So they're investing really in the new people and in the new generation. In Niger, Mali, average age 15 years. I mean, the new generation, they're not connected like the old elites to the West. They didn't study in France or in the US. So it's like a blank page, and the West is not very good at winning over the hearts of the people. That's also Turkey is very active. They're giving grants. Turkish Airlines, they fly everywhere. Many Malians and Nigerians, they go now to Istanbul for shopping. They don't need a visa or get it there at the airport for holiday, medical treatment, even for business, whereas in Europe or the West makes it more and more complicated to, for people to get visas. And it's for our events. When we had an event in New York, it was a nightmare just to get for 5 Malians, visas, not just for an event in New York. It's just so complicated, Whereas the other, our, wouldn't say enemies or competitors, Russia, China, Turkey, they make it very easy. They're much more accommodating, and Sahelians feel more welcome. So I think we need a bit more humbleness from the West, Europe, US. So we massively overplayed our hand. Like this Niger's response to the coup, where European Union basically said we don't recognize these new rulers, we ignore them. We want them to come back. That's also what you hear sometimes from French officials. Let them fail with Russia. At some point, they will be begging for us to come back. I don't think this is going to happen because there are no other players now like Russia, Iran, or you name them. So we need a bit more humbleness and, take people here a bit more serious and, reach out, invest more in education and grants or other activities just to win over the new generation, which is not very affiliated with Europe anymore, but is now fast, making its choice that, Turkey or Russia, whoever is their preferred partner in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Ulf. I was gonna make my own question to Philip, but I do like which is pretty similar to mine, the question made by Mr. Perez Nunez from NATO Southern Hub, if I read correctly. So I will make it in his name. Do you think, Philippe, that high standards and too many conditions and rules compared to other actors are, let's say, preventing the European engagement to evolve into a more positive or effective engagement?
No, thanks a lot, Sergio. Well, indeed, I was mentioning these dilemmas, these political or sometimes moral dilemmas we've been confronted to. And I have to say that the issue of whether we should be principled pragmatists, dogmatic pragmatists, principled-based pragmatist or more dogmatist, and whether we should be more transactional or whether we should, well, all this is something which the EU has been living in the Sahel and elsewhere for quite a long time, and basically we believe that the quality of our selling proposal is also linked to the fact that we are abiding by a number of high standards, and that basically the EU is a partner that can be trusted for the integrity of its position because it abides by some values, by some international standards. So of course, sometimes it's difficult to avoid a perception of double standards, in particular in the Sahel. But I think basically the key is simply to keep the door open with partners who sometimes do send ambiguous messages. We were talking about Mali. The EU military mission in Mali will have left the country very soon, but our civilian mission remains. We don't want to close the door to cooperation with a country like Mali. And it's up to us to find the right balance between constructive or critical engagement and refusal to engage whenever such engagement can undermine our interests or values.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question. I do like the system of quick back and forth questions. Do let me know if any of you is more interested in answering this one. As seen in the Iran-Africa summit this year, the Islamic Republic seems heavily interested in pursuing partnerships with Sahelian states. What spaces or industries do you think Iran is most interested in entering the Sahel? And second side of the same question, do you think this is coordinated with other countries invested in the region, such as China and Russia?
I'm happy to say something. I mean,
Please.
Iran is a bit like Russia. You know, they're under Western sanctions. They don't have much to offer apart from oil and gas and, access, military equipment in the form of drones. That's something they sold it to Russia. No, they apparently offered it also to Niger, and that they need drones to fight jihadists, especially since France has, ended its counterterrorism operation. There were French jets, in various airports in the Sahel. So drones are the way forward. That's one thing for Iran, and also, I mean, it's being rumored they're interested in uranium. Niger has uranium, and Russia is trying very hard to work with Niger. So there's a bit of it's not confirmed. There's a French uranium company, and where the Niger state has a stake in it, and there were various media reports that the Nigerians want them to force to sell it to Russia than to sell uranium to Iran. But I think that's really, I'm not sure that it's going to happen. There's so many ifs, but obviously this is another thing Iran might be interested, that these countries also have interesting, raw materials such as uranium. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Please, if you still have questions, just put them on the chat feature so we can answer them more or less in order. I do have another question coming from the audience. Maybe Beatrice, let me know if it suits you, so we can split and divide and conquer, if I may. The US was highly involved in monitoring operations in what you mentioned is the most affected region in the world by terrorism. How are those activities expected to evolve? What partners can the US count on in the Sahel or neighboring regions?
So if I'm not mistaken, I think the US, after they're going to leave Agadez before September, and they are definitely planning on staying in the region, as it's a very strategic region for the US. It's definitely not the most strategic region, but it's a strategic region. So if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the countries that potentially could be an ally of the US will be Cote d'Ivoire. As the US has already a light footprint in Cote d'Ivoire. The USAID programs in Cote d'Ivoire have been massive since the civil war after 2011. So I think this will be one of the countries that will be on the mix. There's also the Accra initiative and all the conversations regarding the Accra initiative in Ghana. I have to say, regarding Cote d'Ivoire, there is elections next year. We'll see if Ouattara does a fourth mandate. So it's going to be a tricky time to make a decision there. In Cote d'Ivoire, you also have the French, of course, and Ghana. I think could be also another candidate. There's also, of course, Nigeria. There's lots of countries where the US could have a light footprint to have again a drone base or something like that. What I will say, and this is for all Western partners, is that you cannot fight terrorism on countries where terrorism is not present. So as much as Ghana is a country that you could do quite a lot of intelligence gathering, quite a lot of coordination between the coastal states, there is, as for now, not jihadist attacks being committed in Ghana. With Cote d'Ivoire, even if there was attacks in the past, the situation is more or less stable for now again. So if we still want to fight terrorism in the Sahel and contribute to the stability and the security of the region, definitely not the same thing. And I think sometimes we believe might be the same thing because the allies are most likely to work with us, but it's definitely not the same thing. Mauritania could also be an actor, given also that G5 it's having a lot of struggles at the moment, but I think nevertheless what is clear is that the US will remain on the region, and for now, again, because you have elections in November, so that's also a quite an important development that is going to happen there. But it's an strategic region, and the US, for example, does quite a lot now already in everything regarding military exercise, especially on maritime. So I do believe the US has an interest to stay, and that the Sahelian countries have an interest to continue working with the US. And again, I think the US, I mean, they would have stayed in Niger if it wasn't because of the tensions all the way in the end. So this is to say, who discards the possibility of the US having a closer relationship with Mali? Definitely not me. So the pragmatic approach of the US makes them work everywhere and with everyone, no? Not only in Africa, but also in other places in the world. So we'll see. That will be my first analysis. As for today, which might not be valid in a few months for sure.
Yeah, okay. Everybody knows, and there's no need to acknowledge that the situation evolves very fast. I have at least two more questions. And we still have a bit less than 10 minutes, so I think we can deal with it. I believe this one can be answered by Minister Ben Amersfoort, but correct me if wrong, Philippe. What could the EU do, given the current situation, to try to match the narrative importance it places on the Sahel on the ground level?
We are talking about the competitors of the EU, about other players in the region. If you look at the once again at the EU's offer, the EU ODA, the EU development assistance is quite big. The EU has a network of EU delegations, embassies in all 5 countries of the Sahel. The communication channels are still open with all countries of the Sahel, all 5 countries of the Sahel. So once again, there is no, because I've heard the word disengagement or withdrawal. I mean, we were not burning bridges. There is strong consensus at the EU level that the EU should remain engaged. The EU has recently taken the decision to appoint a fully fledged ambassador in Mali, for instance. So at the local level, there is strong EU engagement. There are many programs. All programs, including in Mali, Niger, and Burkina, have not been suspended. Only programs that involve working with the authorities, the central governments of these countries, have been suspended. But a lot of programs which provide direct support to the populations of the region are still in place. Development programs in addition to humanitarian assistance. Voilà. And I have to say that sometimes, despite the negative narrative that we can see on the social media and so on, or the disinformation, I mean, many of our partners are aware of what the EU can bring to their countries. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know whether I'm responding to the question exactly, but at local level, once again, there is a lot underway, and the EU is still very much engaged in this part of the world. Just maybe to pick up or complement the point on the US, which was raised, and the very good response from Beatrice, let me just also mention that some reflection on the Sahel is also intensifying at the NATO level as part of NATO's strategy South, building in particular upon NATO's partnership with Mauritania. Mauritania is the only country of the Sahel which enjoys a particular, well, the status of partnership with NATO. And voilà, so there are consultations, although also with this country at NATO level.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip. One very specific question. I believe you'll be the one answering, Beatrice, because it's very specific in the role of Spain. Leire Guijo, who I believe is a Spanish journalist, if I'm not mistaken, is asking, what role could European countries like Spain play bilaterally in the Sahel, taking into account that the EU is mainly retreating?
This is as a private citizen, of course, I'm not working for the Spanish government, etc., etc. Just to clarify, take into account this is going to be online. I think Spain, as other European countries, can continue working bilaterally with those countries, as I am aware they are at the moment. I will say I would highly encourage Spain, as other European countries, to also have a cohesive European strategy, because right now, which is something I have never seen before, European countries are actually competing with each other within the Sahel. So Germany, Spain, France have a completely different strategy to the Sahel, though we still have a European strategy, and I'm sure maybe Philip might disagree with my analysis. I do believe since July, each partner is doing things in a different way that for sure they weren't doing a couple of years ago. Probably is because the European Union has decided to get a harder line in terms of sanctions and in terms of narrative with these Sahelian juntas, but nevertheless, there is a lack of cohesiveness within the European strategy. So I will encourage Spain to continue doing bilateral work with the Sahel, also to not banish the population, humanitarian crisis, developmental aid that helps millions of people in need is still very important, regardless of who governs them. Especially within a military junta, we cannot really believe that the population is at fault of what the government is doing. So I highly recommend to continue working in humanitarian, working in developmental, thinking on the aftermath of the coups. So these governments hopefully will not last forever. So we need to prepare the aftermath, and we cannot have basically destroy every bridge we had in the Sahel, and therefore we should continue working with them. I truly believe that. I truly believe also that Spain and other countries are also responsible to have a European strategy back into place to be able to deal with these military juntas that unfortunately doesn't seem they're going anytime soon, and we need to play with the cards we have. So while thinking on the aftermath and while trying to get them as close as possible into transitional governments to go back to constitutional and democratic orders, we also need to continue working with the population, working on development, working on the humanitarian crisis. And I think that's really important at the moment. And as I said before, not burning every bridge we have with them. And on that, I think closed doors conversations with the political elite of the country, with the military juntas, a push into the right direction, an honest partnership with them could be exactly what they would like and what they would need. And that also means accountability when needed, as I was saying before. So not at all costs, but definitely I strongly believe we should continue to be there because, as you also know, Sergio, the Sahel is a couple of 1,000 kilometers into Spain. So it's not a region that is very far away from us, probably distance-wise we are further away from Estonia or Poland than we are to Mali. Spain is an African country. We have Ceuta, Melilla, the Canary Islands. So for us, this is one of the most strategic regions, and that's why Spain should continue always engaging. But again, with accountability, not at all costs, and of course, if possible, always supporting humanitarian developmental effort and thinking on the aftermath, once we have democracy and transition, and especially building for peace and stability within the region. I hope this helps, but Sergio, also you're Spanish, so feel free to complete if you have any.
But I'm moderating, so I believe it's not my role, and I do want to give to provide just about enough time to one last question, which deals with something we haven't really touched yet, which is, what do you think NATO's role will be in the region, and could it be involved on the ground? I don't know if any of you wants to tackle the elephant in the room. Mr. Laessing, Mr. Van Amersfoort.
Sorry, I just didn't get the question. I was just, can you repeat it, please?
Yeah. What do you think NATO's role will be in the region, and could it be involved on the ground?
Maybe Philippe has the goal now.
No, as I said, I mean, there is an established partnership between NATO and Mauritania in particular. So there is this southern strategy of NATO, which focuses basically on security on the Mediterranean and so on, and a structured partnership. Regular consultations are taking place between NATO and Mauritania in particular, and voilà. But as I said, I mean, there's also some reflection on how to take this forward, and I wouldn't dare to speculate about NATO presence on the ground or military interventions from NATO in the Sahel.
Yeah, I also think we need probably less military partnerships on the ground. I mean, they have been tested and tried with French Barkhane or these European training programs with mixed results. It wasn't the fault of the trainers; it was more rather the countries who didn't do their part. So it's probably, if we need more focus, would be more on, like you said, how we can stay engaged and offering alternatives to Russia in terms of on the political or education side. But it's Sahel that doesn't need more soldier or more military interventions. They've had too many. With the Russians, they're not making it easier. So many human rights violations. So it's probably more like a political process. We need more in the future.
Thank you very much to both of you, to the three of you, for answering all the questions. Now, I mean, just a quick wrap up. We see there are some alarming trends in terms of violence, in terms of lack of accountability, which, coupled with a geopolitical scenario of shifting alliances, political instability, the withdrawal of French troops, and the dismantling of joint security structures, the emergence of new external actors, it really translates into a critical security scenario, one that really deserves attention from everybody, from the USA to NATO, to the European Union, to definitely a lot of partners. The compounding effect of all these factors, of course, is further exacerbated by numerous and potentially destabilizing challenges in the region. We didn't mention today, but poverty, inequality, land exploitation, or the effects of climate change, but really for the fueling already existing conflicts between ethnic groups and tribes, and contributing to substantial social, environmental, political, and economic tensions in the region. So we, from the program, will continue focusing on the Sahel as an important region for us. Of course, always analyzing everything related to extremism, terrorism, security. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Of course, special thanks to our esteemed panelists, Mr. Beatriz de Leon, Mr. Ulf Laessing, and Mr. Philippe Van Amersfoort, for sharing their insights and their time and the knowledge with us today. Of course, to our technical team. You didn't see them, and that is good, for their impeccable organization. We really hope it has been engaging and informative for our audience. It goes without saying that we look forward to welcoming you again real soon. Finally, do not forget to subscribe to a newsletter so you can stay updated of future events, activities, publications, etc. We also have a Twitter handle, I believe is at GWUPOE, and a YouTube where we upload all our activities, just like this event, which is Program on Extremism. You will find us easily. Thank you very much, everybody. It's very wonderful event, and hope to see you again real soon.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.